Back in February of 2023, my wife and I decided that before we moved to Hong Kong, we should do a big trip in the US. We've been together for 8 years at that point and never really did any traveling in the US except for that one road trip we did in 2017. So I sold this idea of an Amtrak adventure to her. And it was probably the second best train trip in America that you can take. And by America, I meant the US, not all of America, obviously. So it really wasn't that good, given that there were only maybe 4 or 5 legit long-distance train routes in the US that can qualify as a train trip. As in, the train part being good enough to be like an integral part of the entertainment lineup for the trip. For the record, I think the best one is probably the California Zephyr that goes between Chicago and San Francisco. That one cuts through the Colorado Rockies and Utah and Nevada. But we've already seen that part of the country when we did that road trip, so we opt for a different route. The original plan was to fly out to LA and then take the Coast Starlight up to Seattle, and then take the Empire Builder from Seattle to Chicago, and then taking the Capital Limited to DC. Needless to say, things did not go as planned. Basically, a few weeks before the trip, we began getting these cancellation notifications for the trip because of the flood in California. And after rebooking the entire trip twice and getting canceled twice, because Amtrak couldn't be honest about how long it would take for them to resume service between LA and San Francisco, we decided to just give up on the best part of Coast Starlight and board the train in San Francisco instead. So the date is finally set, and we hopped on a 5-hour flight from DC to San Francisco, and we will be making the trip back on over land in about a week's time. San Francisco was fun. It was more fun than I expected, I had to say. Originally, I was put off by San Francisco because we were moving to Hong Kong in a month, and the biggest allure of San Francisco, to me at least, was their Chinatown. So what's the point if we're going to be in Hong Kong in a couple months? But I was wrong. I really enjoyed San Francisco as a tourist, at least. I like their old streetcars and even the touristy cable cars, and we managed to fit in a lot over about 48 hours over 2 nights. So we got to the hotel late on day 1 and didn't do much. On day 2, we went to Alcatraz, and I learned about the occupation of Alcatraz, which explained a lot about the spirit of San Francisco, or at least the stereotypes about the hippie culture there. Then we checked out the sea lions at Pier 39, of course, and the Musée Mechanique, and finished the afternoon at the Ghirardelli Square. As I said, all the touristy stuff. On day 3, we went to the ferry building for breakfast. Then we went over to the Palace of Fine Arts and checked out the Golden Gate Bridge before going to the Japanese Garden, and then taking the light rail back to downtown near Chinatown, where our hotel was. So every stop was basically just one ride away, either on the bus or the light rail or the streetcar. It was all very doable, even with a toddler and a stroller. We of course had the GB Pocket stroller with us, which I think every urban millennial parent has one. Basically, it's a very compact stroller that folds up very neatly. Then we went to the train station on day Yeah, on the end of day 3. Yeah. So, did I say we were taking the train from San Francisco? I meant Emeryville, which is a bit outside San Francisco. It's okay. There's a bus that will that took us there. There was a somewhat fancy food hall near the train station, so we decided to kill some time and grab some food there before the train gets there around like 9:40 p.m. But a 60-year-old divorcee decided to chat up Kate when I peeled off to get food and wouldn't leave us alone even after I came back with our daughter. So we left there earlier than we wanted. To get to the station, we had to go over this pedestrian bridge that goes over the train tracks. I remember we were traveling with a sleepy toddler at this point and had all our luggage with us, which was only a suitcase and a backpack. But the elevator for getting up the bridge had a homeless person living in it, and he was sleeping, so better not to disturb him. So we had to just hulk everything up the stairs. And the train was delayed. But how? Wasn't the train supposed to leave from Emeryville? Because, all the train service south of San Francisco was canceled until next month. Apparently not. Apparently Amtrak lied to us. So apparently we could have gotten on the Coast Starlight in LA. What a bummer. So there's only one Coast Starlight every day going between LA to Seattle. The northbound train leaves LA a little bit before 10 a.m. and arrives in Seattle around 8 p.m. the next day. Because we got on the train halfway up the coast near San Francisco, the trip is a bit shorter, around 22 hours instead of 35. There was a delay. And instead of 9:40 p.m., we got on the train a little bit after 11 p.m. The room, or roomette, as it was called, was pretty small but doable if you don't have a lot of stuff. We made do, even with a toddler. Our toddler especially made a lot of do. It costed us $664. We actually had to pay on the train for Kate's ticket, because apparently when I booked the roomette, I only paid for the roomette and my ticket, and Kate still needs her ticket, even though we've already paid for the roomette. It was all a bit confusing. So anyway, instead of $490, the total came out to be $664 for a one-way trip. Since it was already pitch dark by the time we got on the train, we just went to sleep. By the time we woke up next morning, we were already in the Oregon forest, which was pretty cool. I do wish there's more than a single train a day, however, because there were some stops I wouldn't mind spending a few hours at, but not a whole day. Places like Klamath Falls, definitely Portland. We got to the King Street station a little bit after 8 p.m. They made up some time on the way up. I was wondering why the station was called King Street, given that Seattle wasn't around until like the 1800s. So why would it name after a king? Was it named after? Was it renamed later to honor Martin Luther King? Well, after some digging around, I found that it was named after William R. King, the 13th Vice President of the U.S. under Franklin Pierce, right before the Civil War. And no, he was not on the right side of history. Seattle was rainy the whole time we were there, so it was quite an authentic Pacific Northwest experience. We stay at the Citizen M Hotel because there's one near where we lived in DC, and we like their bar, and they were relatively cheap among the hotels that are not hostels. Kate had decided that our hostel days are behind us, especially now that we have Annie. The room was nice. It's very efficient. It had a large king bed that's wedged into the far end of the room. We ate pizzas on the large windowsill while looking out at the docks. It was pretty nice. The next day, we went to the Starbucks roastery, of course, because we're basic tourists. And it turned out it was just a Starbucks roastery and not the Starbucks roastery, and it's not anything special really. We then took the monorail to Seattle Center, where the Space Needle is, but we didn't go up. Instead, we went to the Children's Museum so Annie could have some fun. Then we walked around Pike Place, saw the gum wall, and checked out the docks. And why does every American tourist trap outside the northeastern seaboard has a place that looks like this? We felt like we were back in Tennessee. The next day, we took a day trip out to Bremerton. It was very quintessentially Twilight. Sorry for the reference there. We went to a vintage, like a secondhand, like an antique store, and a board game store, and a pastry shop. Just your typical small town stuff. It was nice to just walk around, although it was drizzling the whole time, and we didn't manage to see any whales. We got back to Seattle to catch the Empire Builder that evening. The train departed around sunset, and we were treated to a nice view of the, get ready for it, Twilight over the Puget Sound. The next morning, we woke up to the views of the Rockies. The train made 2 stops, one east of the Glacier National Park and one west of the national park. This is also where I hope there are more than one train a day for this line, because I love to just sit and have a meal at one of these stops and walk around for a few hours, maybe taking a gondola ride up to a ski slope and drink some hot cocoa. We should have just gone to Switzerland again. This was supposed to be the highlight of the entire journey, but I didn't find it all that exciting. You really only get to catch a good glimpse of the snow-capped mountains for like a minute here and there. The train doesn't go over like a bridge between 2 huge mountains, like some of those you'd see in the Alps. So most of your time, your view is just blocked by the slopes immediately next to the tracks. I actually enjoyed the views of the plains better that came after the mountains. You get there around lunchtime on day 2. You get to see a lot further and truly grasp at the size of this country. You can see the huge mountains slowly shrink into the horizon and linger there for seemingly forever. Maybe the flat earthers are right. I mean, they're not, but I get it when you can see that far, when the land is that flat and that vast. By the way, this whole time I forgot to mention the food on these long-haul trains. They are, for the most part, pretty solid. There was the crowd favorite, of course, the Amtrak steak, served with mashed potatoes and string beans. I have to say it's a perfectly fine steak, given that it is included in the ticket price if you've booked the room on the train. The tickets actually include 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you have the option to either dine in your room or in the dining car. So anyway, the food was good. It did get a bit repetitive near the end of our trip, having already sampled almost every item on the menu, and it was still train food, so it's not gonna blow you away, but you may be adequately surprised if you've set your expectation low enough. It's better than any airplane food I've had in the US, I'll put it that way. So anyway, everything was good, and we were just chilling on the train and watching the country go by until I got a notification on my phone.
Catastrophic Norfolk Southern train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio in February. One first responder detailing the chaos at the scene.
So the original plan for us was to ride the Empire Builder all the way to Chicago and then catch the Capital Limited back to DC. But because of the derailment and explosion, the ticket we booked for the Capital Limited became really limited. So limited it was canceled. Oh, and there's one thing I forgot to mention. The entire time when we were on the Empire Builder, I think there was something wrong with the sewer, or the what's it called? The septic tank, the septic system of the train. So every once in a while, the entire, like every hour or so, for about 5 minutes, the entire train car will just smells like poo. So we made it to Chicago, got ourselves another Citizen M hotel, and we had some deep dish pizza, of course. Then luckily we managed to get a flight for the next day to fly back to DC. Chicago was cold. We've both been to Chicago a couple times before, and I really like their museums, but we had been living in DC for quite some time by then, and that was enough to make us sort of sick of museums. So instead, we took a short walk around the city and we went to see the concrete beach, which I liked because of how absurd it is as an idea. And we had some pastry at yet another Starbucks roastery, which it just happened to be one that's between our hotel and the concrete beach. I was gonna say we're not basic usually like that, but now I think about it, we kind of are. It's just so much easier to go to chains when you're traveling in the US, because most of the hubs and downtown areas are just dominated by chains. But we did kind of get out of our way to do this train trip, which wasn't that easy or conventional, I guess, by American standards. It wasn't even cheap, so I guess we're not too basic sometimes. I've taken my fair share of Greyhounds when I was in college, and this train trip was nothing like that. It was more expensive than the bus, and actually more expensive than flying too. I don't really know how Amtrak's supposed to succeed given the way transportation is set up in the US. It's not convenient enough, nor is it cheap enough or comfortable enough to compete with all the other modes of transportation. But it's not because driving and flying is so great in the US, rather it's the opposite, I think. It's just train travel in the US is so bad that the most practical and comfortable options are driving and flying. Traveling for fun in the US isn't easy. You pretty much have to fly or drive. Flying always sucks, especially when you have a small children. I don't think I have to explain that one. And even if you fly a lot of the time, you still have to drive after you've landed, unless you're just gonna Uber everywhere or to the conference center. But I'm talking about traveling for fun, so you probably want to get around a little bit, so you probably still need to rent a car. And I don't want to drive because that's work. I mean, sure, you can enjoy driving, but it's still work. You can enjoy working too. I just don't want to also work as a driver when I'm supposed to be on vacation. I think public transport and private transportation, the labels, I like to think of it as more service transport and like do-it-yourself transport. In the US, most of the time, I don't have the option to just sit back and pay someone to just transport me around over mid to long distances. So yeah, trains, I think they're kind of like taxis, but over longer distances, and that's just not an option in the US. So yeah, America needs better trains.